Okay, welcome back, everybody. So we went through 3.1 yesterday. You kind of got an intro to the debugger. Today we're going to talk about unit testing, which is kind of the topic for 3.2. So I'm going to jump straight into the slides here, and then we can kind of go into a practical example. Okay. Now we didn't get to starting the guessing game yesterday, so I'm going to go ahead and take that still as our practical example today, and we'll kind of just have to build it from scratch. So we'll do the building, and then we'll add the unit test to it as well. All right, so let's talk about tools that you can use for application testing. Now there's kind of two topics in here. Is what is it? How do you do it? How do you use unit testing? Maybe talking about a little bit of some of the other options that are out there. And also to ask, and talk about why is testing worth your time, and why should you invest in learning how to do this. Because it is a valuable skill. It is something that you'll use in industry. But there's also a lot of differing opinions when it comes to testing and what the right approach is. And to some sense it's situational, some sense there's preferences, but there's also general rules of thumbs that will help, rules of thumb that will maybe help save you time as far as, setting up some automated pieces so that you don't have to test everything manually. Okay, because what we've done so far, and what you've typically done with your apps is anytime you make a change, well, then you have to go retest and check everything that you might have broken, right?
Yeah.
So,
I got a question. When you say unit testing, what do you mean? Just like try to find as many bugs as you possibly can manually?
this whole lesson. I'll explain it.
Okay. All right. I was just trying to get an overview.
You're getting the cart in front of the horse. So what we've done so far is considered manual testing. Manual testing is what manual developer testing is what you've done so far, and that means, well, clicking the buttons, going through, changing values, entering text. That's all. Everything you've done is considered manual testing. So what we're getting into today is different kinds of like automated testing, where you write code to test your code, rather than clicking all the buttons yourselves. So there's a lot of value to automated testing, and it's totally a really important thing. I also say, just in general, developers have kind of a bad habit of undervaluing testing your code. And that really hurts us as an industry, because your end users, I'm sorry to say, a lot of times the only things that they see is your bugs. A lot of times they're not going to see that you have a lot of working code, or how much of your program is there and functioning. They're going to get stuck on your bugs. And that's true for a lot of things, right? Whether it be Cyberpunk releasing with their bugs, whether it be, their delays, whether it be all these kind of things that come up. A lot of times people, your end users will focus heavily on those things. So there's some value in ironing those out. There's a lot of value in ironing those out before they make it into your user's hand. So anything you can do to make that happen is generally worth your time. Now, fixing bugs, finding bugs takes time. It takes effort. It's not free, right? And there's not, no matter how good of a programmer you are, eventually you're going to put a bug into the code. And that may be that could be because of all sorts of issues. It could be simply because somebody else was making changes, you're making changes, those changes conflict. And so, what made sense when you were testing it doesn't make sense as soon as you push the changes out, and now both of you have made changes. And I've had cases where, I implemented a feature, fixed a bug, and somebody else's changes have broken that because they were working in a different area, and vice versa. So, you've got to think about more than just, oftentimes bugs can occur more than just because of things that you've changed to the code, but they may also occur because of changes that other developers have made to the code. So, simply the fact that coding and software development is a collaborative effort can actually introduce bugs, So, but we can't really write software, large-scale apps. You can't write software as a single person. So you're eventually going to run into that. So one of the things to understand and is anytime you have bugs, the sooner you fix them, the better. The sooner in the process that you can remove them, sort them out, find a solution, the less time it will take to fix them. As you get further and further on in your development cycle, starting from just writing down the requirements on paper, going out to actually putting it in your client's hands, everywhere as the time goes on, it takes more and more work to fix that because there's also because of just different dependencies that are happening, as well as and different processes that come into play, as well as just the more code you pile on top of something, the more code that then depends on that behaving a certain way. So if it depends on behaving a certain way, even if that way is buggy and incorrect, that code then that depends on it may have to change. So you might start with a small program, and that small program has 2-3 functions. If one of those functions has a bug, well, no big deal. It only affects one function. But as time goes on, now you've got a bigger program with, say, 100 functions, and 50 of those depend on that one function. Well, if you change that one function that had the bug, you potentially have to now fix 50 functions, not just one. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the sooner you can find those, the better. And so part of being able to find those earlier is automating that process. Because if you are testing it manually, you're relying on somebody to be essentially lucky and find it. Versus if you can automate it, then you can then run that automated test every time somebody puts something up in Git. In fact, there's some tools there. We call them continuous integration, where we can say, let's run tests, let's run other code, run checks every time somebody pushes something to our code base. So you can say every time that this repo is, go check, go look for bugs. And so that can end up meaning that you find things a lot sooner, which and in the end can potentially mean that they take a lot less effort to fix and such things.
Hey, Mr. Smith.
Yep.
This topic here for Android, is it a bit specialized? This automated testing, writing code to catch errors, or is this something that we just haven't heard yet, but it applies to Node?
Yes,
it's
something that hasn't been covered yet, but it does apply to everything. It does apply everything.
Okay.
So what we're talking about now is general anything you build. So I'm talking about Android. I'm talking about desktop applications, web applications, games. Anything you build, testing and automated testing are a thing, and there are tools available. So that's a general topic. We'll get into the specifics of how we're going to do it in Android here, as we kind of progress. But the theory of it is pretty important, and that's probably more important here than maybe the specifics of how to do it, because the specifics of how to do it is actually super, super simple. The specific code that you have to write is not that complex. The problem is understanding the why and when you should do it, when you shouldn't do it. Okay. So the end goal is of testing and automated testing is to reduce the number of bugs that make it into your end user's hands. So, like in this class, you can think of, well, who's your end user? Your end user is me, right? You're turning it in for a grade. So, bugs that you have there are going to be counted against your grade. So you don't want to have those there. So, anything that you can do to kind of speed that up, that helps. Okay? And so that's the kind of gist there. Now, there are a lot of kinds of testing, and there are a lot of what we call maybe levels or varieties of testing that you can do. So on the different levels or scales, you can do component testing, which is the lowest level of testing, and that's where you test basically the smallest pieces in your app. And that depends a little bit on what you're building. What are components? So like if we're thinking about the Node.js world, right? What's the smallest component that I can break my application down into and test?
Method?
Or a function, right? We'd usually call it a function, method or a function, right? So I could break it down and test a single function. On a larger scale, what do those functions usually make up? Classes, or if we had like a JavaScript file in Node, what do we call that?
Index?
Mm-mm.
A module?
A module, right? So a module, right, is a single JavaScript file that's got a collection of methods, right? So in Node, basically the smallest components you can break things down into would be like functions, classes, and modules, right? So you could do component testing on any of those three levels. Does that make sense? So on the flip side, if I'm going to do component testing with Java, what are my smallest modules that I can break things into? It's basically the same thing, right? It's going to be methods and classes, right? So I can create a test that tests a single method, or I can create a test that kind of tests the module, tests the class. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the component is whatever that smallest part is. If you're building things like, you're building React apps, well, React uses, you're creating these controls, basically, custom controls that you put on the web. So you can test those controls, and those would be your smallest component. And in fact, modern React, you're writing those components as functions. So you're literally just testing a single function if you set it up right. Integration test comes in when you're trying to connect things. Integration tests is kind of a very loosely defined term, and you'll find a few different definitions of that out in the wild. Sometimes people say, well, integration is just putting things together. And that's kind of the general, that's one understanding of it, is that as long as you have multiple components talking to each other and working together, then it is an integration test. So for instance, if I'm testing 3 classes, some people might say that is an integration test, right? So that's one definition of it. In reality, that's not the correct definition of integration testing. Integration testing and where it provides value over component testing is when you hook in the additional dependencies like your database. So typically in a component level test, you don't use the database, the file system, other network resources. You don't go out to the internet. You don't test the sensors, all those kind of things. If you're testing a component, it needs to be isolated to that and basically no other code running. Versus an integration test involves all of those external dependencies again. So if you're doing a test with the database hooked up, or connect to your web API, or connect to Bluetooth devices, that would be an integration test. because you have those dependencies in there, and not, as we would say, mocked out. Okay. And does everybody kind of understand what I mean there by integration test? Some idea?
Yeah.
So a component test is generally without the database, and the integration test is kind of with the database. Protocol testing then is using tools like Postman. So remember we went through and used Postman a little bit last semester to test our web APIs, right? So Postman is able to test anything that operates over the HTTP protocol. So that's why it's considered. That's why I would consider that a protocol test. Does that make sense? So if you have a common protocol that you're kind of using for the website or whatever it may be, then that would be that. So Postman's basically that's your tool that we use for protocol testing, and then system testing is testing the whole thing together. And that means, that's usually where we have been doing our manual testing. Our manual testing has been at the system level because everything's there and it's actually running, and we're running it as the user would see it. So if on your team, most software development teams are not composed of just developers. Sometimes you'll have... Oftentimes you'll have testers that are testing your system as well. Oftentimes the title that they go by is quality engineers. So you have your software engineers and your quality engineers, QA. So they're the people that are usually testing your system. Large in part, they're going to be operating at the system level. Obviously, testing can happen at any of these levels, and your QA may do it at any of those levels. But most QA focus purely at the system level. So that's, the system level is kind of the most expensive way to test. It takes the most effort, and it's the hardest to automate. But it does give you a view of the entire system as the user will end up seeing it. So you have a bunch of different levels, at which you can write and implement a test. Okay. So what we're going to be doing today is going over a specific, just one of those levels of testing. We call it unit testing. Unit testing is at that component level. So when you write unit tests, we are testing things at the lowest level of, say, here it would be methods and classes, and you're isolating it, and your unit test is only ever testing one class, and never testing multiple classes together. So you kind of have to isolate your logic in such a way that you can say, I'm just going to test this one class by itself. So that's what a unit is. A unit is kind of your lowest level component. Okay, so we're going to write those for classes here. If you were going to write unit testing for Node, then you would write it for, say, testing, write a unit test for testing a function, or write it for testing a module or a class. It'd be that, whatever that lowest level component is. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So those are some of the simplest tests to write because they're small, but they're also in the grand, and they also run very fast because they're testing a very small piece of code in general. But they don't necessarily provide all that much value by themselves sometimes, because they're so focused on a tiny piece of the software. So they help, but they're not going to fix all your bugs. They're not going to address all your bugs, especially because when we're talking about component testing or unit testing, we're dealing without the database, right? So if we're working without the database, there are bugs that we're going to miss. and we're also always working at the component level. You're always working without the UI, right? So that also means that you have to kind of break the UI and the business logic out separated. You can't just mish those together, or you won't be able to really test it as a unit, okay? So different types of testing that we can do, we kind of talked about the level. One thing we can do is installation test, which says I'm going to try installing it on the hardware or wherever it needs to be installed. So in this case, this would be the Android device, and just see if there's any issues with the installation. So I can test the installation. I can test for compatibility, and maybe I'm testing for compatibility between different versions of Android. I can test for regression, and regression means has there been a change between different versions of your software? So, for instance, maybe you release version 1 of the software, and it works a certain way, and then version 2 it works a different way. So a regression test would be focused on sussing out those differences and making sure that they don't exist where they shouldn't. Get it?
Yep.
So regression tests is probably if you're working at QA or working with QA, working as QA or with QA, regression tests is largely what they do. Most QAs spend most of their time just making sure that things haven't broken that were working in a previous version. That's a lot of your time. And you can test for regression at all three of those levels. You can test for regression at the component level. You can test for regression at the largest level. There's also acceptance testing, and acceptance testing says, if you usually involves having a new feature or something, and you're seeing does the new feature meet the criteria that basically your contract or your agreement was for to build that system. Is it an acceptable solution to the problem at hand is basically what you're trying to determine. So at the end, it's a yes or no in terms of acceptance. Most tests are yes or no, but that one's definitely. You can also do performance testing to see, how fast is it, how much memory is it using, how much does it use how is it using the network, how is it using the file system, and looking at those kind of things. You can look at scalability, and scalability largely has to do with web development. And so there you're saying, well, how many servers can I run this on, and is it efficient if I run it on 100 servers? Is there any problem with taking this website that I built to run on one server and running it on 100? Usability testing. Usability testing means really sitting down with your end users and kind of figuring out where are their trouble points and seeing where their trouble points, their pain points, in terms of using the software, trying to find places where the software is confusing or where there's one expectation for the behavior, but the expectation is different than the actuality. So that's kind of where you suss that out. Usability testing generally is more of a psychological kind of thing more than a technical sort of endeavor. And then you can also do security testing. So you can, do that in a lot of ways, whether it be penetration testing is kind of the most common, where you throw hackers at your system and see if they can get through. And so that's oftentimes how a security test happens, is you just have somebody try and break it, and then you learn something from, what they were able to break and go fix those things. So you can do testing from all of those different perspectives, and the difference is that you're looking for different things, right? So those kind of tests can be implemented using any of those 4 levels of testing, but the thing you're looking for is the thing that changes. Okay. You can also do user interface tests using automated tools. Specifically in Android, we kind of call that instrumented testing. which is covered in chapter 6.1. So in 6.1, they kind of go through Espresso, which is a tool for kind of automating the actual interaction with your UI, such as button clicks and typing things into fields and all those kind of things. So that's the, using the UI is an automated UI test or user interface test. So those are one kind of test we can do that's not the kind of test that we're talking about today. So as we're talking about testing, there's a few different options for, how you approach when and why you write those tests or when you do testing. Okay. So given what we know already, and especially given this, when is the best time to write your automated tests?
Wouldn't it be in the QA?
What do you mean in the QA?
Well,
So
I guess in the beginning or in the middle of whenever you're doing all your code.
Okay. So this is QA when you like hand it off to your QA would be code is where you write the code. QA is where you hand it off to a tester for them to test it. So you're saying that you should do all of your testing right here.
Probably no. I don't know. Before release, that's 100%. But
The answer is no.
yeah,
A definite no. If that's when you do all your testing is in QA, then you honestly your team is not functioning well. Okay, if that's where all of your bugs get caught is that late, right before it gets to users, then your team is not operating well, and you're going to be in crunch mode, right? So somebody else.
Well, it's as early as possible. So
Okay.
there you go.
Okay.
So as far left as you can on that chart.
Yes, as far left as you can. So what does that mean? What does that mean in practicality? How would I fix a bug at the specification level?
Try and like pre-plan bugs you might have and how you might fix them.
Okay, such as what? Let's say you have a requirement that tells you, like your requirement that I gave you that says build a program that sums the number 1 to n.
Make sure they can't enter like letters.
Okay, so that would be something to spell out right at the specification stage, right? Say they can't add letters, and if they try to, then what happens, right? So the specification stage, you would say what needs to happen if they try to enter letters. Okay. What else in there? I said, give me a number n, give me the sum from 1 to n. Return the sum to 1 to n.
No negative numbers.
No negative numbers, right? So that should be coded in the specification. And so what, so what could you write in the specification to say what to do if there's say -1? What would you what would you have it do?
Print out a message saying a number must be greater than 0.
Okay, so that makes sense, right? So you'd specify in the requirements. Okay, well wait, there's something left out in there, right? I didn't specify what should happen in these cases, right? In these edge cases, and that happens a lot. A lot of times the first run, and especially when considering that these specifications are often written by non-technical people, they don't tend to think about that thing. Us thinking about, considering negative numbers is not an obvious thing to the people writing the requirements. Okay, oftentimes. And so that's, those are things you have to think about. Or if you're working with, say, Bluetooth, you have to think about, connecting and disconnecting, and how does pairing work, and all those kind of things you have to kind of spell out at the beginning. But going back to that kind of original question, so, let's say we've got that requirement that we've said, okay, there should be an error message if you type in letters, or there should be an error message if you type in a negative number. All right, so we've got that. What can we do then at what could go wrong potentially at the design space that would introduce a bug?
What could we do? Time space? I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
The design step. So we
What
talked
can
about
we do
spec.
to prevent them?
Yeah, what can we do to prevent bugs at the design stage?
Hire a guy that checks it out.
Okay, you're the guy that's checking it out.
Implement it. But I'm just saying, like, it should be done at some point. And
Okay. Well, so done at some point means do it here. Right? Done at some point means do it here.
Well, no, it could mean any time, but it could be there as well.
But that's really
I understand what you mean.
That's what happens. If you say that we're going to do something at some point, it doesn't happen. Right? So you actually you have to plan for things like that and put it into the schedule and say, we're going to do this before we go on to the next thing. Because a lot of times people just sit down, especially developers, and say, okay, this thing I need to build, I'm just going to start hacking code. Right? The first thing I'm going to do is start hacking code, and then I'll do the design after I start writing the code. Right? That's oftentimes how most developers operate. They write the code first and then come back and figure out the design. But that's fraught with problems, because that means, anything that you could have caught between the specification or, thinking about the requirements, thinking about design, you're not going to catch until here, because you haven't done it. Does that make sense?
Right.
So what can we do to kind of think about and make the design before we write the code? What tools do we have in our tool belt? And I've given you some of these tools already.
Balsamic
is a great tool in the design space. Why?
It's a lot easier to use than Android Studio to design your app.
Right. And the other thing to think about there, it's not generating code, right? Which actually means that you don't have to think about and fix bugs in the design. But if you make a design for Android, does it apply just to, say, an Android version of it? What if you...
You could use it universally. Yeah.
Right. You could use it universally. So that Balsamic design I can use for making a web app. I could use it for making a Android app. I could use it for the iOS app, right? And so that tool is very, those design tools are very agnostic of the platform that you use them for, right? And that's the kind of tools that you want to take for in the design space, is tools that are not connected to your technology. Does that make sense? So Balsamic is not connected to your technology. So what can I do in terms of, again, so let's say Balsamic is one of those tools. There are some other ones. What can I do with Balsamic that might head off bugs later off in the process? What can I do as I'm working with Balsamic that can solve a bug early?
Well, I'd say just update it if there's something that comes up. That just update your design.
Okay.
It's not going to fix the bug, but at least the screens that you got, the wireframes will reflect reality a little bit more. Otherwise, it'll be like it was when you did version 1.0.
Right. So what I'm asking is how can you catch the bug before it becomes a real bug? Right? Before it becomes a bug in your code.
With Balsamic or just in general?
Well, in general, and somebody else can chime in here. with balsamic or in general. So let me ask a basic question. The balsamic mock-up that you make, who is it for?
Well, I mean, it's it's for us and for the person who's asking for the program. It's kind of just our base layer to.
Mm-hmm.
It just provides an easier way to explain the systems.
Right.
I think maybe the UI to the person that's wanting it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's part of the mix. And so, who is their design more valuable to? Is it more valuable to yourself, or is it more valuable to the person you're building the software for?
It's more valuable to us.
Okay. Why is it more valuable to you?
More valuable to the person that you're building it for.
Okay. Why so? How so?
Because they need it. I don't know how to answer that.
Okay. But
Well,
that is a question that you should. If you're making designs, you should understand who it's for and why they want it.
I would say, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
I would say that it's more valuable to us to make mock-ups of things,
Okay.
because then when you're actually putting it together, you don't have to guess what might fit where and
Mm-hmm.
all of those parts. You can just kind of put it where you know it's supposed to be, and it might not fit perfectly, but it's definitely better than guessing the first time around.
Mm-hmm. So if you're pre-planning, if you're designing it as far as yourself is concerned, you can know, is there going to be screen space for it? I think is what you're trying to say. Is there going to be screen space, and where on the screen is it going to be able to fit in? I think is where you're getting at, Troy. Am I right?
Yeah.
So that's one part of it. What happens if you try to make that design then, and you find that things don't fit?
I guess back to the drawing board.
Okay. Back to the drawing board, as in you're just going to go back and make another screen mock-up?
I mean, I guess at that point you could just test it out live.
I have a much better solution for that. Anybody can guess? What would be a much better solution at that point if you try to do a mock-up and you find, oh, there's not enough space to implement what you needed to do?
Another screen?
Okay. What a lot of people are forgetting here is that you're never going to be a team of one. You're never going to be a team of one. And so, and even today, you're not a team of one. Okay. So who else is on your team?
Probably some designers.
Probably some designers, maybe some designers. Who else?
Well, whoever's in sales will probably have some input as far as the layout and what customers really want, because what let's say it's like designed for real estate agents, the interface, the developer isn't going to know how to do that. I mean, they can guess, but
they'll know some stuff, and
they might know some stuff, but they're fine-tune it. Probably not. They would need to get input from another department. Probably sales would probably be the closest thing to that.
Or a better place to ask her, if you're making real estate, who's your customer? It's the real estate agents. The best person to get in the room is a real estate agent, because they can look at your design and say, oh yeah, that'll work for what I need to do. Or they'll tell you that couldn't possibly work, right? So you've got your customer, you've got designers. What else? There's at least two other roles in there that you really need to consider.
Maybe management?
Management, or your boss, right? Your boss is a player in this system too, right? And they may have a stake on the design as well. Who else? Remember, you're not a team of one.
The other developers too.
The other developers, right? So, because think about this: what happens if I'm making a screen, and well, that screen is so complicated that it's going to need 3 people to actually build it, right? Well, then should I keep that design solely to myself and not share it with the other people that are building that same screen? Probably not, right? I probably should share it with all of my coworkers, and to some sense, get their input, right? So going back to the original question, hey, I build this, I do the screen mock-up, and I find out there's not enough space for everything. Who should the best thing for me to do is go to talk to somebody. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The best thing to do when your design doesn't work, when you have a problem at the design stage, is you talk to somebody else. And that, that can be a lot of different people. That might be that you're talking to your boss. You might mean you're talking to your customer. It might mean you're talking to designer. It might mean that you're talking to the person in the cubicle over from you who's also a developer. Don't eliminate any of those options as potential people to talk to. There's a limited number of people that can make a finalized decision, but nearly everybody has useful input. Okay. So in that perspective, right? So who is the design for? Is it for you, or is it for somebody else?
Someone else.
Largely someone else. Yes, it's helpful for you. And yes, it's helpful for you to organize your thoughts. But large in part, it is to communicate that design to other people involved and kind of get some agreement and suss out issues earlier in the process. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So Balsamic, screen mockups are a great solution for that, and that applies to anything you're building because pretty much everything will have a UI. However, it shouldn't be the only design that you make, okay? So if we're thinking back to the previous semester, right, the applications that we built had databases behind them, right? And so I did ask you to make certain designs related to the database. What did we call those?
ERDs.
Which stands for... What does ERD stand for?
Hold on.
Entity relationship diagram.
Yeah, that.
Entity relationship diagrams. So that's another kind of design, right? You can design the UI, and you can also design the backend, the way the data is stored. And so an ERD actually functions as a design regardless regardless of how you store the data. You can actually use an ERD even if you're not, say, storing it in a database. So those are things that you should really consider if you're making an application of any scale. Making a design for the UI and making a design for the database are generally good things to do before you proceed to writing the code, right? And the important thing there is remember, as I said, the design is largely not for you, it's for other people. So what you don't want to do, the biggest mistake you don't want to make, is say you make the design. One of the two mistakes you don't want to make is say you make the design and then you don't share it with anybody. If you make the design and thus proceed with the code, have you gained much from making that design?
No.
Nope.
No. So what do you want to do with that design before you go from design to code?
Get some opinions on it.
Exactly. You should totally do that. You should make a design, get somebody's opinion on it, and take their input and take their feedback, and then update the design and proceed on with the code.
Hey, Mr. Smith, does this have anything to do with this waterfall versus Scrum stuff that we hear about? Because we haven't really touched on that a whole lot, but I know
Yep.
industry, they're really big on the non-waterfall stuff now. Whatever
Yes.
I think it's
Yeah.
called Scrum, right?
So you see this diagram right here, and you see the stages:
Mm. Yeah.
specification, design, code, QA, release. That's a waterfall right there. That's waterfall stages right there. So we are talking about that. Yes. Um, the difference between Scrum and Agile, the difference is that oftentimes with waterfall, it's kind of a straight progression from left to right, and that straight progression may take anywhere from 3 months to 2 years. It's a long scale progression from the left to the right. So what we do with Agile and Scrum and where that becomes different is we make that cycle much closer to about a week or two. So we go from the specification to the QA stage. We go through that process every 2 weeks rather than at every 3 months. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's just more frequent. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just more frequent. So it still happens, right? It just because you're doing Agile does not mean that you neglect doing designs. It actually means that you do more designs, and it just means that in waterfall, the traditional waterfall, you'd make all of the designs at the beginning, and then basically never change them. What you do instead in Agile and Scrum specifically, you say we'll make a design every 2 weeks that reflects what we're going to do for that 2 weeks. Does that make sense? So you're not designing everything at the beginning, you're just designing it in chunks. So you're doing it more frequently, but in smaller pieces. Okay? So the best thing you can do if you're making a good scale application is to make that design, make the balsamic mockup, and then share it with somebody and get their input, right? So let's say you're working on a lab assignment, right? And you have, let's say, the what was the money tracker that I gave you for lab 3, right? Who can you share that lab design with?
You.
Okay, you can always share it with me. Who else?
Maybe some random person not associated with the class,
Random
just to get
person.
some
So
outside opinion.
what I will say from this point, I am concerned in terms of plagiarism when it comes to sharing code. I don't honestly care too much if you share your design with other students. Because my experience is if you share your design with other students, one of two things happen. One of a few things happens. Either they turn it in exactly verbatim, and then it's an easy call for plagiarism, because it's like, okay, this is exactly the same as somebody else, or or they learn something from they learn something from it, and their own design improves. And so I think that while I really, really don't want you to share code, I really don't have as much of a problem you sharing designs, as long as you in the end, like, as long as you're not turning in that same design, as long as you're not working on the design together. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there's some tools in there that allow you to collaborate on designs. That's not what I want you to do. But if you're saying, here's a PNG of the finished thing I did, you can post that here in the Discord channel and ask for feedback. That's fine. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So if you want to make a mock-up of the money tracker, which would be a great thing, you can post that in Discord and have people look at it. That's fine. No big deal. Because that's a good exercise to kind of look at and talk about those kind of things. So, the way that you catch bugs in design is you share them with somebody else who has another set of eyes. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So, and generally speaking, too, from the balsamic mock-up styles, everybody has their own user preference, their preferences for how they want things to look. So usually, even if the design is out there, you're probably going to find that you don't want to build it like the other person did anyway. So usually people, even if they kind of know how other people are designing their application, they usually, and more often than not, I find people kind of making their design different anyway, because they want their application to be more unique. So so that's that, and then so at the code stage, you can catch bugs too, just by kind of testing it, doing a little bit of defensive, thinking about your application as you're building it. And then finally QA would be like, okay, there's maybe bugs somewhere in the software, we don't know where. We're going to go test everything, bang all the buttons until something breaks, right? That's basically QA. Bang the buttons until we find it, until it breaks.
Now, what if you're just like the only person? Like you're the QA, you're the everything, design, QA, and everything. So you basically have to do all that yourself.
Yeah, you still have to do that. But what you should do, right? Again, remember, don't think of yourself as a team of one, right? And so, what's the first step? Is specification, right? So with a lab assignment, you're not coming up with the whole specification, are you? Right?
No.
So if you look at the lab assignment, right? I've given you that first part, right? I've given you a specification, right? I've given you some requirements for that assignment. Now, have I given you all of them? Not really, because I didn't tell you how you should structure the UI, right? I'm leaving the design portion of that to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'm giving you some specifications. I'm also kind of expecting so I do have some input there, and there obviously is probably some expectation about what should happen for letters and negative values, probably some presumed expectation, maybe if it isn't specified there, which is kind of the norm in the industry. And so if there's a case in here, right, that isn't specified, what should you do?
Ask.
Yeah, simple as that. Right, simple as that. The best thing for you to do if there's a bug in the requirements is to ask. And so sometimes in places like this, I intentionally leave certain things like that out, like negatives, because I want you to think about it, and in some cases I want you to kind of ask what that question is, ask what should happen in those behaviors. Does that make sense? I'm intentionally leaving those things out, like details of what happens in negatives, because that's typically how you get the requirements from the people writing them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So, is there any question that you should ask me about some product lab?
What do you want us to do with negative numbers?
Show an error message. So an error message, right? So that's stage one of the requirements, right? And so then you go, so you can kind of hash that out. If you see that there's a hole in the requirements, which I guarantee you, most of the times I do intentionally leave some, then one of the things you can do is ask. Okay. So the next kind of stage in there is design. So if you're going to go make yes, in some, the design is going to be you're going to make the design, but, well, what's my stake in the design? Well, you can hand the design to me. I can say, oh, this, there's a problem here in your design. Does that make sense? Like, you can pull me in at each of those different stages. And, but the point where you get to quote unquote QA, where you hand it off finding bugs, that's where I grade it, if that makes sense. That QA process is me grading it.
Right. So even though it's not required by the assignment, it's probably in our best interest now and later on just to do a design for each one.
Yeah. Because it's an opportunity for you to find things that you hadn't thought about early on, and it's an opportunity for you to bring me in and say, oh, okay, I think you have a problem here, right? And that kind of thing. Or in the case of labs, even sharing that balsamic mock-up with other students, say, hey, or random people, as you were saying, to say, hey, here's what I'm thinking to do. What do you think? Right? Questions there?
Nope.
So, yes, sometimes you're effectively the lead on all of those sides, but even if you are the quote unquote lead, you're always building software for somebody, and so that person you're building software for always should be involved. Does that make sense? There's no place where you ever end up writing code unless you're the only people who write code strictly for themselves is hackers. That's it. They are the only people that write code strictly for themselves. Everybody else is writing code for somebody else. And so if you're making a game, the person you're making the game for, well, those are your players, right? Get them involved. So usually the sooner you find it, the better, and there's a lot of different ways to kind of to head that off. So given that, and because this was kind of a tangent, we're kind of bringing it back, we're talking about building automated testing. So in terms of automated testing, you can build those tests at different points in the process. And so sometimes, and this is kind of the norm with students who are just getting into unit testing, is usually what they do is they do this whole process. They go through specification, design, code, QA, they're tested and all of this stuff, and then they finally write the unit tests. Okay? At that point, how helpful is an automated test going to be if you've already written all the code and already tested it fully? How many bugs do you think it's going to be able to find? And how much time is it going to save you? Probably not a lot. Does that make sense? Like if you write unit tests here after you've written the code, honestly, you're just going to be wasting your time. Like you'll just be at that point. You're just it's going to take a lot of time to write it, and you'll get relatively little value out of it. So one of the things that we do in the industry, and there's a push for, is what we call test-driven development. And the idea with test-driven development is, well, bugs are, I should catch bugs early, which means I should write the test early. And test-driven development goes so far to say that you should write the tests before you've even written the code. Does that make sense? And so your tests basically become your specification. So, for instance, if we're talking about, that case, right, I may need to write some tests that test that it has the proper behavior for negative, right? And I may write those tests before I even write the code. Does that make sense? Everybody with me there? Sort of?
Yeah.
In practice, there's a few things that, there's a few gotchas with trying to do that. But that's the idea with test-driven development, is that you write the test first, and then those tests kind of drive your development. So you start by first, defining what the requirements are in kind of paper form. Then you turn those into test cases. You write those test cases, assert what the conditions are, what is the expected behavior. And then finally, once you've got the tests ironed out, you kind of write code against that test. You iterate over it, you refactor it until your code passes the tests. Okay. And then as you go on, you keep implementing those requirements. But the idea is that you write the test first and the code second, versus what people get into the habit of, which is the reverse. A lot of people get into the habit, in kind of the lazy habit of writing the code and then writing the test. Okay. And that may be what you do for the first few times you do it, just because you don't have the full view of how to write the test until you're there. But that's kind of part of where they provide the most value, is if they're done early. Okay. And sometimes that ends up being, in reality, sometimes that ends up being all the way before you write the code. Other times that ends up being while you're writing the code. But the one thing you don't want to do is say, I'm going to push the test all the way back until after I've got the application working. Okay? So looking at your projects, you'll see that in Android Studio, there's kind of what we call 3 source sets. And I'm going to bring up the project from yesterday so we can just look at where... no, I don't want to bring up... I want to bring up another one that's a brand new project. Let's see. So I'm going to go to Hello Toast. And you don't need to bring this up right now. I'm just showing you what you're seeing. So if you look at here, so I'm in the Hello Toast folder, and remember we just created this blank, started from empty activity. You'll notice that there's these 3 basically looks like folders, right? Android, Ranken, PR Smith, Hello Toast. You see there's 3 of those, right?
Yep.
So one of them is labeled Android test, and one of those is labeled test. So the top one's where we put all our code, which is what we've been working with so far. This last one is where you put unit tests, which is the topic for today. And the middle one is where you put instrumented Android tests, which is the topic for lesson 6.1. Okay. So this is where we put instrumented test or UI tests. Down that bottom folder is where we're going to put our unit tests. So there's 3 different categories for your source code. Okay. And so those tests that we write, we consider those local unit tests. So the local unit tests, they just run on your Windows machine, the same one that you're developing their code in. It doesn't run in the emulator. It doesn't run on the device, which also means that you don't have access to any of the Android APIs. All you have access to is the core Java APIs for local unit tests. So on the other side, instrumented tests, then you have access to the full suite. And those instrumented tests do run on either an emulator or the physical device. Is everybody with me there, kind of tracking?
Yeah, the 2 other folders, are those automatically created?
Yes.
I don't have Android Studio open, but that's automatically done when we create a new. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
All 3 of those are created automatically when you create a new project. So there's just already there. And if you look at any new project, you'll see that there's already an example instrumented test there, an example unit test. So those automatically get put in anytime you create a new project. Okay. So those are what you'll see. And so what the topic for today is the local unit tests. So the idea with a unit test is it's the smallest test available over the smallest part of your application. So in this case, classes, Java methods and Java classes. And so we isolate that component down so we can simply determine if the behavior is, and think about different cases and inputs and outputs to think about, is it true or false, right? So we're building tests that say They either pass or they fail. There's no in-between gray area for your tests. It's one or the other. So we kind of say, if we're testing a method by itself, we say, well, here are the inputs I'm going to give it, and then here are the expected result that it should output. So for instance, if my method is add, well, then I would expect if I give it 2 and 2, the output would be 4. If I give it 3 and 5, then the output should be 8, right? So I define the inputs, I define the outputs, I check that that's correct. So those are the kind of tests that we're working with. So those local unit tests, they're compiled and run entirely on your local machine using the Java virtual machine, not the Android virtual machine. And you can use them to test some parts of your app, namely the internal logic. So you don't get access to the Android framework, a device emulator. Also means you can't use things like sensors or location data or Wi-Fi, etc., or even activities. Activities are not part of your, can't be part of your unit tests in context and all those kind of things. If your class that you're trying to test does need to refer to those framework components or does need to refer to, say, a database or Bluetooth or things like that, then you have to mock out those parts. And typically we use the Mockito framework to do that, to mock those things out, to make fake versions of it. That's beyond the scope of what we'll talk about here. We won't really get into mocking because we haven't talked about how to do databases stuff, especially. Those unit tests are written in JUnit. You can technically write them in other frameworks, but by default, the way they're set up is JUnit, which is kind of one of the more common unit testing frameworks for Java. But it doesn't necessarily have to be the JUnit framework, but that is the one that we'll be using here.
Hey, Mr. Smith.
Yep.
With this whole topic here, I can't help but think about air handling and just running it and trying different things. And this is a substitute for that? This does all of that?
Yeah, this is a substitute for you trying it. What you can do is you can tell your tests to try it. So you set them up and then you just say run, right? So like if we look at what we did yesterday, I tried all 4 of the buttons. We tried different combinations of inputs, right? But I had to do that all manually. Remember yesterday, right? We had to try all of those different cases manually. What we're talking about is writing code to do that and to do it in a reproducible way, where I can just say go and it'll try every single one of those things.
Okay, all right. Seeing is believing, because that seems pretty complex. But all right, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, a lot of time. So the answer is sometimes it can be very simple, and yes, sometimes it can get very complex. And the reality is yes, as your code gets more complex, so does your testing. It takes more complicated code to test more complicated code. Okay. So that's that's kind of the gotcha there. So tests are going to be in the same package as kind of the associated class. So let's say we have a calculator class. Typically we would call the test for that, we would call that the calculator test class. So we'll create a test class that corresponds to our main class. We'll notice that, hey, you can't, the imports in there are org.junit, but we don't bring any of the Android classes in. The specific path for your code for tests, if you're looking on the file system, you'll find them under source test Java, whereas like your normal code would be under source main Java. So that's the actual application code would be source main Java. This is source test Java. So you're going to see a few annotations up at the top for different things that you need to bring in JUnit. A lot of these things are brought in by default, so I won't go over them too much here. So let's kind of get into how you write a test class. You write your unit tests. So in order to write that class, so first of all, here we're testing. This is kind of with the simple calc. So we've got a calculator class that we're going to test. I'm going to make a class called calculator test. And then the first thing I need to do is tell it that it is a test class and what test runner to use. What runner are we going to use to run our tests? So this run with annotation tells Android Studio what test runner to use. So here we're saying that use the JUnit for test runner. So any test class that you create, any unit test class that you create, needs to have that annotation. Otherwise, it will be completely ignored. Okay, so there's a few different annotations that you have to put on. One of those is on the class. Everybody with me so far?
Yep.
Okay, so that one has to be on the class to tell it what to use JUnit for. The next thing you do is you define your individual test cases as methods on that class. So here we've got an add two numbers method, and this is a test. This is a single test, and so we annotate it with the test annotation. So we annotated the class with run with. We annotated the method with @test. Okay. So inside of this test, I'm saying m calculator. Let's say add. So we'll add 1 and 2. And then we're going to run an assertion, and that assertion determines whether or not it was successful. Okay, so we first run the code in question, and then we check that result. Basically, I'm checking if that result is 2. Okay, so the specific syntax, don't dwell too much on that because there's a few different ways to write this, but the idea is that we're trying to say that basically the result is equal to 2. 1 plus 1 is equal to 2. Everybody with me so far?
Yep.
Okay. Again, I would not dwell on the assert this is an equal to, because I don't know that these slides are fully up to date with all of that. So we'll kind of look at that when we get into the code. But the point is you do something and then you assert it. Okay. And so the typical way are actually the one thing I would point out, there's basically a 3-step formula for writing any of your tests. And so the first step is always set up the required data and stuff that you have to have, perform the test, which is usually just call a method, in this case add, and then the last step is assertion. The setup step you're not actually seeing here because we had to create a calculator class. And so that's actually happening somewhere else. But that would have been our setup step, is to set up the calculator object, instantiate it. So the test annotation tells JUnit that particular method is a test method. It tells it's an individual test. So it will give you a pass-fail for every one of those test methods. The next thing we want to look at is there's 2 annotations. There's a before annotation and there's an after annotation. The before annotation says that this method should be run before your tests to set it up. So in this case, we're saying this is this setup method. We're giving it the before annotation. So that's going to say, well, we want to create the calculator before you actually run the test. So that'll get run before. And you can use that to set up the environment, set up variables and other objects that you may need for multiple tests. And then the next one is the after annotation. These methods can have either any name. They don't have to be named set up and teardown. You can be named absolutely anything you want as long as they have the before and the after annotations. So before runs before your tests, after runs after your tests. So then you do this to clean up resources. Most tests, a lot of tests, you don't have to. The before and the after are always optional. The before you'll generally want to put in there because oftentimes there are some things you want to set up for multiple tests. The after is honestly one that's very rarely used. You have to have a pretty complex sort of test usually to need to do an after. So in terms of running those tests in Android Studio, so the way you get to those is, let's say I go into here, Android Studio. Remember we saw the 3 different source sets. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on the 3rd source set here, the test source set. And I'm going to say run tests in Hello Toast. So that's going to go run. And instead of running, your application on the device, which is what we normally would do, this is just going to run those unit tests here in Android Studio. So it may take a few minutes for this to go because it's having to set things up. But once it finishes, we should see a readout of tests that have failed or passed.
So these tests don't use the emulators, right?
Correct.
That's what you said.
They don't use the emulator. They don't use the physical device. Okay, so now that it's finished, you can see here's the readout. So it says Hello Toast, example unit test. That's our test class. And then there's the test method. Addition is correct. So does that make sense? So it's showing you the test class and then the test method. And so we can look at this simple test method, which added automatically. It's just saying assert equals. 4 is the expected number. The actual is 2 plus 2. So for instance, if I were to change this code and rerun the test, 2 plus 3, check that that's 4, we should see that it comes out as a failed test instead of a passed test. So you can see down here, it expected 4, but it actually got 5. Got it? Questions so far?
Is that the only way to run the test is from going, like, right-clicking on that file? Or can you do that from the main activity to...
No, I don't believe so. Not from the main activity. So you can right-click and run the file itself, and that would run just that test. Or you can click the source set here, and that runs everything in the source set. But no, there's not a way to just go from main activity there. I think you can, if you have the unit test up here. I think I can right-click in here and say run. Yeah, so I can right-click in here and say run.
Where does this tie into the main activity? Where is what's the method we're checking here?
So they're not checking a method here in this. The example one that's generated doesn't check a method. It's just giving you kind of a placeholder.
It's just a sample, right? It's just showing that it works. It has nothing to do with Hello Toast or the counting or anything. Okay, yeah. Okay.
So the thing that it generates is it's just checking that 2 plus 2 is 4. And so no, is that a helpful test? No, but it is one that always works. So it's the one that it bundles. Okay. Yeah. So this right now has no dependency on the code that's there.
You said it's the one that always what bundles?
It always comes with a brand new project.
Oh, okay. That was hard. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Hey, Evan, did you have something to say?
You got a close eye on your chat room here. I was just popping in. There was a internship that I just emailed you about, okay. And it's something that you can kind of forward to the class and let them know about. And they're just basically looking for some applicants from us.
Okay.
So if you just want to send it out to your class and let them know, and then find out who's interested, and we can send it on over.
Okay.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Yep. No problem. So as you kind of saw, you'll get, once it runs, you'll get a pass or fail for each of those tests. And so then you can kind of see and try and diagnose what the problem is. It's worth noting for testing floating point values, you do have to put in a little bit more So that was just a case of integers. With floating point, you get rounding errors, so you can't just say a equals b. In fact, if you try to say 0.4 is equal to 0.1 plus 0.3, or I think, sorry, 0.3 is equal to 0.1 plus 0.2, you don't get exactly equal because there's slight variation, slight rounding error. So if you're going to deal with floating point numbers in your unit tests, then you do have to deal with those errors. And so you introduce something called, an epsilon, basically, an idea of how much error are you willing to accept. So in here, for example, we've got, when we say assert, we have to provide another value that last. So we have the expected, the actual, and an epsilon. And so the epsilon is how much difference, how much error there's allowed to be. So if we say there's 0, well, this test fails because we expected 0.3, but actually 0.1 plus 0.2 is 0.3000004, right? So we have to give it a little bit of margin to allow for that rounding error. Does that make sense?
Third argument is epsilon.
Third
Zero,
argument is epsilon.
0D. 0D.
So here in this case, they're saying 0, so they're not allowing for any margin, right? So if I wanted to say, let's have it round to 2 decimal places at least, then it would be like 0.01. If I put 0.01, then I'm saying that there can be then there can be up to 100th, up to that second decimal place of error. Or sorry, where it has to be exact. Does that make sense?
I'm still trying to catch on there. It seems like you're always going to fail at some point with a floating point number unless you round. Like 0 wouldn't do it, right?
That's what I'm saying. This is never going to be 0.
Oh,
this third
okay.
argument should never be 0. This third argument should never be 0. It should always be a value. But there's not like there is no way to pick a standard value that's going to work for everybody. There is no here this epsilon works for anything you're ever going to write. It's got to be based on the specific thing that you're building and how much error that is tolerable to.
Okay, so that looks like it would be like 15D or something.
Well, that's only if you're accepting you're saying it has to be really, really close, right? This by itself is not enough. In this context, it's not possible to determine what the epsilon should be.
Okay.
You don't have enough information. Because it may be for the application that you're building that it needs to be accurate out to that decimal place. It may be that it needs to be there. So, how much error you're willing to tolerate is really dependent on what you're building.
Okay, yeah, I think I got it. 0D. Wouldn't it be just 0?
It would just be 0. That's equivalent to writing 0. They're just casting it basically to a double. That's a 0 casted to a double.
All right, I guess I gotta use it to know. Do we use it a lot in reality? Are we gonna be doing a lot of floating point testing?
No, we're probably not going to be doing a lot in this semester. You'll probably do some. You'll probably need to do some, but we're not going to be doing a lot.
Okay, all right.
So, for instance, the value that they picked here, 0.005. Okay, well that makes the test fail. Makes the test pass instead of the 0, which made it fail. Because again, so you're typically not going to use 0, and you're never going to use 0 as that third value. But what that value is, you have to kind of determine based on the application. So that's the error that they're willing to accept. So that's enough to round. It should be accurate to the third decimal place. You see the 3 zeros and then a 5. So that would mean it would round up to that give enough space to round to the 3 decimal places. That'd be what that is. So there's some references to learn more about that and such. So what we want to do now that we've kind of talked about, what testing is and where it fits in, and a little bit of intro to how to write these, is I want to jump in and make the guessing game. And as we build that guessing game, we're going to kind of see about how do we need to write the test for that game. Okay? Before we get into that, let's go ahead and take a break. Is a 15-minute break or a 20-minute break better for people? Just in general asking.
I like 20.
Okay.
Gives me more time.
All right. So let's call it. Anybody else?
I'm saying 20.
Okay. So we'll call it 20 minutes. Come back at 2:22, and we'll sit down and start writing some code in Android Studio. So 2-minute warning. We'll be starting up here shortly. Everybody had a chance to get something to eat. Yep. Stretch your legs.
How was your weekend, Mr. Smith?
It was good. Busy. Yours?
Not bad. Good.
Quiet room. Got the sun coming up here and streamed through my blinds. I barely can see anything. I'm blinded. Where'd you go, Watson? All right, so let's get back to it. So the plan is here's the prompt for the thing we're going to build. So it's at the top of the 3.1 lab sheet. Okay. And so what we want to do is we want to pull up Android Studio and start building that.
Oh, I didn't even read that. It said in class. I already started working on it.
Okay. Yeah, so we're going to start working on that. So I'm going to make a new project. File, new project. Okay. Definitely going to be an empty activity, as usual. I'm going to call that guessing game. And I want to make sure I put that into the 3.1 folder. Now, all of the ones for 3.2 we're just going to keep in the 3.1 folder because they're just going to be add-ons to those same labs, those same projects. Okay? So create a new project. It's going to be 3.0 guessing game. And that's where we'll start. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and delete Hello World as soon as I get in here. I don't need that label. Okay. So if we kind of look at the prompt, once you got the project up and started, if we look at the prompt, okay, what can we say about the UI for this application? What can we say?
Text box.
Huh?
Need a text box.
Okay, we need a text box for the user to enter what?
The number.
A number. Okay. Anything else I need?
Also, another text field that will tell you if the number was too large or too small.
Okay. So should that be a text field?
No, just like a text, like a label.
Yeah. So that would be So we're gonna have an edit text and a text view to put it in Android terms, right?
Yeah.
So we definitely need that. Do I need anything else?
A button.
Probably a button. Now, I don't necessarily have to have a button. There's another way I can handle that because remember that the keyboard in Android actually has an enter key. So I could actually hook to that enter key, which is usually what we end up doing. But yeah, a button is usually how we would solve that. Does that make sense? So a button's usually how that's done, but we could do it with just when the you can kind of think of it like a form submission kind of thing. You can handle when the enter key is pressed. So I will kind of look at that here. We haven't talked about how to do that yet, but I can kind of show you how to hook up that listener.
Hey, Mr. Smith, with
Yep.
regard to text view and
Yep.
edit text fields, other than being able to just enter them and change the text, the user doing that is there really any difference? You can pull data and put data in both of them equally, right?
Yes. Yeah. They're both subclasses of text view, so they both have get text and set text. But yes, the difference is that the user has no control over a text view versus they can type into an edit text. And that is, in some sense, it's a minor thing, and in the other sense, it's a big thing. And you really should never use an edit text if it shouldn't be editable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. And one more thing. If there's something that is supposed to have text in it, like the output, say maybe the box will say too high or too low for the guest. Tell me again what the best practice is for what you enter in under common attributes. There's the text, and then there's the text with the wrench. I'm still not clear on what those are and what we're supposed to do as we develop them.
Let's get into that in a minute. Let's get into that.
All right.
About that later. My question was just, what do we need to put in, right? So the answer for today is that we for sure need an edit text, and we need a text view, and then optionally we need a button. So I'm going to say in here, I'm probably going to put the edit text, and actually I think I need one more text view in there, and that text view is just going to be a label. So that text view, I'm going to put one at the top to say, hey, this is explain kind of the rules of the game, if that might make sense. So maybe up at the top, put an 8 margin on that. Oh, and I need to get my system UI on, and I want to go to the Nexus S. So I'm 4-inch tablet, system UI. All right, so I'm going to have a text view up at the top, and we might want to have that one kind of explain what the rules are. So if we kind of look back at the prompt, it says, okay, so secret number. All right. So maybe this will say, I've chosen a number 1 to 10. Guess what it is. So because we kind of want to tell the user what to do, right? So I'm going to put a label up at the top to tell them that first. Okay, next thing I want to do is provide a way to enter a number. And so I'm going to just drag in, for the start, I'm going to drag in this number field, and then we can look at the different options there. So I'm going to drag in the number edit text, boop, 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 and change my default margins up to 8, so I need to do that. So give everything here an 8 margin. All right, so that's a start. I probably want to change both of these widths to match constraint.
What'd you put the text appearance as?
I haven't changed text appearance yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I haven't changed any of that yet. So I just put some text in there. I will, though, go ahead, now that I made that match constraint, I'm going to align it center. So that is the one piece of formatting I'll do here right now. Okay, so we've got a little bit of text up at the top. We've got an edit text there, and I want to go back and add another text view to tell the user the output.
Mr. Smith.
Yep.
Should you add a reset button too? So let's say if they don't know what it is, they can reset.
That's a good question. And actually, I'm going to remove the constraints on this button. So yeah, that's a good question. So I probably need to have a button to reset the game, as well as a button to submit the guess. So maybe I put those underneath the box and another reset button over there. Okay, so anchor this to here. Although maybe I should give these some IDs. So let's see. So this is the rules text. And the guess edit. And this is maybe the outcome text. This is maybe the, let's see, what button? This should be the guess button. Guess. And reset. So this is guess button and the reset button. And so let's put some text in here. And so this is the one where I would use the wrench, because whatever I put in here, I don't really care about it showing up in the app ever. This is just here to provide a placeholder in the design. Does that make sense? So anywhere where I would rather have it be blank when the application starts, that's where I use the wrench. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. I thought so. I just wanted to be sure.
Yeah. If the value that I'm going to put there I would never actually want to display, that's where I use the wrench.
What's that wrench called? Like, how is that? How would you call that text? The wrench text, or?
I would call that the designer one. If you're looking at the code for it, it will go under the tools. It will be tools : instead of Android : if I go look at the code for that, you'll see it's the text on that text view is tools : text rather than Android : text.
In any case, you want something either tools or Android. You just wouldn't want to leave it blank, period, because you wouldn't be able to see it.
Yeah.
It'd be hard to anchor it and all that.
Yeah. I don't want it to be. I don't actually want it to be invisible in there. And well, it's our part to. For one, it's hard to anchor it, It's also a problem for the next person that comes in, because if it's like this and it's blank, there's nothing there, you basically can't see it on the design. Does that make sense? You basically can't see the field. So it's just there to provide enough space to give you a handle.
And you don't need it for the edit text where you put the guess in, because there's a line there. You can see it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's basically just for, the only place I'm going to use it is for that label, which would otherwise be invisible. Okay. Any questions there? Does that kind of make sense in terms of designing that interface?
It's not so much a question, but it's just I've noticed that when I have a default margin,
Yep,
it doesn't always set it.
Yeah, and I think that's a change in the recent version of Android Studio. So what I've noticed is if I anchor something, so I anchored this to the left and the right, when I did that, it cleared out the margin. If I anchor something to the left and right, or top and bottom, it seems to set it to 0.
Okay.
That's been my note. So yeah, it sometimes isn't applied, and so anyway, I've had that same problem too. Okay, so we've got that. I probably before I leave here, I should check it at least in landscape. And so if I look at it in landscape, I do notice that okay, well, everything fits, but why might this still be a problem? If everything's on screen, but there's definitely a problem here with this design. What might that be? Okay, so that's one question. Okay, what else? Buttons being fired.
Oh, your button restrictions or no?
Okay. So there's one thing that unfortunately I have not found any way to preview in the designer, but has a really big impact. Okay, so I'm going to run the emulator. I haven't even put any code in here yet, but I'm going to run the emulator, and we can see how this behaves. Okay, so there's my layout, and that is how I would expect it to be. Okay, so that much is good, right? What's probably the first thing that the user is going to do?
Type a number.
Okay, or even before that, click on the field. So as soon as I click on the field, notice that something immediately happened. The keyboard popped up, right?
Oh, yeah. In landscape, it'll cover up the button.
Yes. So the keyboard pops up. Here in portrait, it's fine. And the rule of thumb, I would say, is, portrait, you lose about a third of your screen usually to the keyboard. So in reality, when you're designing Android apps, especially for smartphones, you only get to use the top 2/3 of a screen. basically. The bottom third of the screen here in Portrait is reserved for the keyboard. So all of this area down here that looks blank, right, isn't really space that I can use. Does that make sense? Because it's going to be covered by the keyboard. So, and then when I go sideways, okay, it's actually it's like 50% of the screen is covered by the keyboard. In this case, it's all of the screen.
Well, yeah, but then you click done and it closes it, right?
It done and closes it, right? But that's, you do have to think about and code for that behavior. Now, I'm going to try this quickly on API 21 because I feel like that 5.0 was different in the way that the keyboard behaved there. Okay, no, it's the same way. So it used to be that some smartphones, some keyboards I played with, what would happen is it wouldn't completely cover it like that, but it would just come up and cover half of the screen. So that's just kind of to be aware of, especially in landscape, you do have to kind of think about especially the keyboard, but even Portrait. Okay. So yeah, I can bring this up, type in a number, and hit done. So that's going to be how that operates. Okay. So that's okay. That's okay. Other thing I might notice there, it looks kind of odd for the number to be all the way over here on the left. So I'm going to go ahead and change that to center align the text. So this, and that, all three of those are center aligned. Okay. So as far as the input box is concerned, going back here, so remember we kind of looked at, you can click the flag and see all the options that are there. And so the type that you pick is going to change what the user can type in. Right. So we know it needs to be a number. So that's definitely going to be one we need to check. There are also a few other options in here, for instance. So we've got number signed. That would allow us to put in negative numbers, which in this case, our range is 1 to 10. So we don't want to check that in. So that will actually keep the user from typing in numbers like -1. Also, by it being numbered, they won't be able to type in letters. That's how that's enforced. If we wanted a decimal point, then we could do number decimal. I believe, let me just double check, but I believe by just setting it to number, I think that will also eliminate the ability to enter a dot. So, see, I can't even push the dot.
Is there any way to restrict it to only let it type in a number 1 through 10? Or no?
No, there's not. There's not. If you wanted to do that, you'd need to use a spinner instead. Oh, I meant to keep that open. Oh well. Okay, so that's our layout. I do want to go and extract those strings. It's still kind of complaining about that to me that they're all not been extracted. So I'm going to go Alt-Enter and extract these. So this is the rules text. This is the guest button. This is the reset button. And I don't have anything for the output text.
The edit number or re-enter a guest edit. Yeah, that says auto fills hint attribute. Yep. I get that. Did you do that already?
Yep. You'll get that on any edit text that you drop in. And that's a warning to kind of indicate that you probably should specify how autofill works. In general, you should. Well, for this form, it doesn't really make sense for anything to autofill. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click that second option. This is from Alt-Enter. I'm going to set important to autofill no, because there's actually no reason for it to autofill on this particular form. It wouldn't be helpful. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the one of places where you'd want to set those things, like if I want to do a login screen, I want to make sure it autofills the username and password. If I'm making an order screen, I would want it to autofill like the user's address. So that's where you set those things. But in general, you do want to set some hints. And now I think, and it's complaining that there's no label for attribute as well. And so if that's a screen reader thing. So the way to fix that is to add the hint up here to the label above it and say this is the label for ID guess edit. So that's what it's asking for, is a label for up here, and autofill is set to no down here. Okay. All right, so let's go to main activity. Before I go to main activity, I need to head up my on-click listeners for both of those. So in here, I want to say on click, let's say on guess, I'll enter, and there we go. And here on the second one, the second button, I'm going to say on guess. Oh, nope, on click. On click, on reset. There we go. So I got two methods, on guess and on reset. Okay. So I've got the layout out. I've got my click handler stubbed out. What's probably the next thing I should do?
We can create some variables at the top for where we want to hold things with the dash.
Okay.
The underscore.
Okay. So what do I need to hold?
One would be private and call it guest number.
Okay. Do I need to store the guest number?
No.
Why? You're right. You're right, Zach. Why?
Because that's just their guess. Wouldn't it make more sense? Well, I mean, if you want to store their past guess, but we're not really asking to store any of those. We're kind of just saying, hey, guess a number between 1 and 10.
Oh, that's a great question right there. Mo, you were saying something?
We are asking to store their previous number. It says if they've already guessed the number, ignore it.
Right? Because it says it only counts. It counts only one as one try if you guess the same number consecutively.
So would we just use an array and store all their current guesses in an array and then check that?
You don't need an array. You just need their previous guess.
The keyword is consecutively.
Right, consecutively. Right. So I actually don't need to store their current guess, and I don't want to store their current guess.
Oh, you can just check. You can just check if they've already guessed them. Oh.
Right. Where is their current guess? Well, their current guess is in the edit text. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Their current guess is in the edit text. So, in fact, if I create another variable to store it, that variable will now be inherently different than what's in the box. Does that make sense? So I don't want a variable for their current guess, but I do want one for their previous guess. Actually, this can just be an int. Right? So what would be a safe assumption for their previous guess at the beginning of the program?
Nothing. Empty.
Okay. Nothing empty, that they haven't guessed anything before. So null would be a good way to satisfy that. What's another option?
Something that's not in the range.
Okay. So what would be outside of that range?
0.
0. Okay. So if I start at 0, right, then, okay, so that's not a valid guess, so that's a reasonable starting point for this program. 0 isn't always, but in this case it is, right? So I do need that state. Do I need anything else in terms of the state? What other state do I need to keep track? So we talked about the current guess and the previous guess. What else?
Would you need to track like wrong guesses or anything?
Okay. Well, that would be a good thing. So maybe I call that guess count. Okay, so that's obviously going to start at 0. The actual random number, absolutely. So private int, and borrowing the terminology from the prompt, I'm going to call that secret number. And so secret number, I don't know yet, but I could initialize that to 0.
Nobody's ever going to guess that number if it's 1 through 10.
Yeah, well, I need to generate a number, but I can't generate a number up here. I can't write any code up here. I have to wait till I get into onCreate so I can generate it.
Yeah, I was about to say 10 out of 10 odds in your favor.
Anything else? I think we've captured the state. We just need to capture still the controls, right? So what controls do I need to have a reference to?
The edit text.
Okay.
And the output.
Okay, so the edit text and the output. And so guess, edit, and private, text view, outcome, text. So I need a reference to the input and the output. I don't need a reference to the buttons, at least for the current situation, because, well, we're not going to run any code with them. We're just going to respond to them being clicked. But if I wanted to, for instance, disable the buttons at any given point, then I would need a reference to those buttons. Okay, so we've got that kind of in place. The next thing for me to do is sort of initialize those values. So let's say I get the UI components first. So guess edit is going to be equal to find view by ID, and this would be r.id dot guess edit. Okay, and then I need the outcome field. So outcome text is equal to find view by ID, and then that's r.id dot outcome text. Okay, so I've got my input and output controls, and so now that I've kind of set that up, now I can actually generate my random number. So one of the things I'm actually going to do is I'm going to backtrack a little bit, and I'm going to say private random. So I'm going to create a random object because I'm going to use that. Call it rand is equal to new random. So I'm actually going to have that one created. Well, no, I should create the new random when I get into onCreate. So there we go. Okay, so then we get into onCreate. I'm going to create this random object. And this is I'm going to use this to generate my random numbers. And then I want to actually generate the random number. So I'm going to say secret number is equal to rand dot next int. And so next int will give me a number from from 0 to what I tell it. So I'm going to tell it from 0 to 10. I'm going to tell it 10. So it'll give me from 0 to 10, or sorry, 0 to 9. And so I'll just say 1 plus that. And that gives me a number from 1 to 10. Any questions?
Let's see if it works, or can we test it yet?
Well, we can't test it yet because there's nothing shown on the UI, right?
Oh, yeah.
So,
should we start working on the on guess then, since we already have the logic for the secret number and everything?
Yep. So that would be a good thing to maybe start with the on guess. Another thing I might do, so I can test something, I might actually just quickly write in here to change the outcome test to tell the user the secret number. Because that will actually help me with testing it. So I'm actually just going to tell it the secret number. So that way I can try to run this again, and we should see that it generates a new number every time. Now, one of the things that I want to point out here, remember that we generally want to extract our string resources to or strings to string resources, right? Now, in this case, I have a string, right? Is this always the same string that I'm outputting? Is it a constant? So it's not. It's a combination of constant text plus variable text. Does that make sense? So the way around that, I need to actually use something slightly different. So what I'm going to do here is I want to extract that string resource, but I'm going to end up needing to put that in as a placeholder. So you may remember that there's a way to do formatting with printf in Java, and so kind of the way to do that would be the format string that I want here would be %d, right? So secret number : %d. That's what I'm going to end up wanting to put in my string resource, and then I'd like to inject that secret number where that is. Now, one way I could do that, I could say here, I could say string.format. Secret number. Okay. So if I say that, we're going to then extract, we're going to do that here. And so you can kind of see that that works now. So using string format. And where was I going? Another thing I usually want to do before I extract the resources is I usually want to say positionally where it's at. So if I just put it in %t, it'll just be whatever the first one is. So oftentimes you'll have more than one argument going into here, and so you need to specify where they are. So I believe, I can't recall, I'll try it here. I believe that the first one is 1. Yeah, it is. So in that format string, I'm going to add a $1 that says take the first argument and put it here. So if there was more than one argument, I'm going to take the first one and output it there. Okay? So that's useful when you start extracting string resources, and that's generally considered best practice to always put a positional thing in. All right. So let's say Alt-Enter, and I'm going to extract the string resource. Okay. And you see it's going to take this value now, secret number, %1, $D. We're going to call this secret number text. Okay. Now, the way it's going to change the code over, right, it's going to replace that with a call to get string.
Can you show me you did that? I highlighted it. I didn't get the option.
I did Alt-Enter. So I just was in the middle of the string, and I hit Alt-Enter.
For me, it wasn't the yellow light bulb you had. It was in the little under drop down.
Okay. So one of the things I know is that the code that's here is actually not as efficient as it could be, and not as simply written as it could be, because as it turns out, getString actually has formatting capabilities built into it. So I can actually do this inside of the getText. I can change this to just be getString, no string format, and pass secret number as the second argument to getString. So anytime you have any of these formatting strings, you can just pass that as further arguments to getString. So this is what you should have after refactoring all
that. The whole thing for me just turned red.
Okay. It may have not updated yet.
Okay.
So what I want you to do is get it to that same kind of text that I've got there. And I'm going to post the string here for reference. So you have both the format string that I put in, as well as the code I used to apply that format string. Okay. So now that I know the number and that's being outputted, then we can actually implement onGuess. So first thing to do in onGuess is going to be to find out what guess they've put in, right? So how can I extract the number that they put in from this field? What do I need to do? What code do I need to write?
Can you repeat that one more time?
So I need to, before I can write the first line of code in onGuess would be to like extract the number from here, right? So if I type in, I should type in 20, it needs to go get that number.
Would you just get the guess edit?
Okay.
Getting what value the guess edit has.
Okay.
Because the guess edit, or is it already being set because it's doing find view by ID? Is the value being set or no?
Okay. What value are you talking about? Are you talking about the value of this variable, or are you talking about the value that's here?
The value that's the 20, is it automatically getting put in once you do the find view by ID?
Okay. Well, it is there where I can get to it, but it's not just guess edit.
Oh no, you want to set the secret number. You want to set the value of secret, or no, the guess. No, never mind.
No.
I messed up. Never mind.
You want it would be get text.
Yes, that's what I'm looking for. I need to get the
string.
text and then toString, because I want to get the text that's in the field, and then I want to strip off any formatting that's in there. Okay, so that's that, and that will give me back a string, which is the guess.
Can't you just make it an integer and then cast an integer?
Nope. You can't cast to an integer. You can't cast between strings and integers. Because they're completely different in terms of memory. So I've got the guess as that. All right, what's the next step?
And you're going to have to parse it to an int.
Okay, I can parse it to an int. All right, so let's say I do that, and I'm going to call this guess string. Or guess, yeah, I'm going to call it guess string. And then int guess is equal to integer dot parse int. So let's parse that string.
Could you just do that on one line, or was that bad practice?
Okay, well, I could do that on one line.
Or could it just be...
I could do that on one line.
Int guess string. It wouldn't be a string anymore. But...
Hold up, Paul. Here's why. Here's the reason I'm going to split that into 2 lines. I click the guess button and it crashes. Right? So I click the guess button and it crashes. That crashes because of the parse int, right? So if I do that all as one line, I don't have an opportunity to intercept it between it being a string and going to an integer, because this part immediately causes an exception, right?
Okay.
So if I break those up, that allows me to do some checking to see if it's an empty string first. Does that make sense?
Okay, so if you just put guess at it, what you have on the right side of line 34 inside the parentheses where it says guess string, that'll crash it. Okay.
All because this throws an exception. So I'd rather be able to say, well, if there is a guess string there, so namely if guess string dot length, if there is one there, then I want to proceed. But if that length is, if the length of the string there is 0, then I might say, well, I just want to go ahead and stop and show the user an error. So I only want to parse it when there actually is a guess. So in this case, I would say, well, let's go get the guess. Let's say if it's that, then we're going to say outcome text dot set text, and we'd set it to please enter a number. And so I might extract that as a string resource. And so please enter a number. I would move to guess, maybe guess blank error or empty error. Yeah. So that's the reason I would do those as 2 steps. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's just better for your error handling. And then as it turns out, because we've already limited this to only be digits, the user can't then, as long as there's a value there, they can't type in an invalid integer. So I know that at this point, integer.parseInt can't throw an exception, actually. So I don't actually need to wrap it in a try-catch. Does that make sense? Does that follow?
Yep.
So we call that defensive programming. So I take the guess. All right. What can I do with the guess now that I've got it from the user?
See if it equals
Compare to the secret number.
Okay. So if the guess is equal to the secret number, then we just need to tell the user, hey, you won, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I probably want to write that into the outcome. And so I'd say something like set text. And the particular resource, the particular string I might want to do there, I said, you guessed the secret number, and then I want like a %d, guess the secret number %d in %d tries. Okay, so I've got two places where I'd like to put in I'd like to put in the secret number, and I'd like to put in the number of guesses that you've made. Does that make sense? Now, as I set up with here, when I've got positional things like that, I want to say, I want to be more specific about that, to say which position it's coming from. So in here, I'm going to say $1, $1 and $2. So this is the first value, and this is the second value. Okay. Now, one of the reasons that you want to put those in there is because while this kind of makes sense to do it in that order in English, it may need to change for grammatical reasons. It may be that the number of tries needs to be first and the guess needs to be second. Sometimes the grammar of a language will change the order of those parameters. So as long as you use that $1 sign and the $2 sign and in your translations, then you can switch the order of them. Does that make sense? If you just do %d, then you can't switch where they are. So I might call this alt extract string resource, and let's call this, what do we want to call this one? Winning text. Maybe. So winning text, which is this value. Okay, so I want to call getString here. And then to getString, I'll pass that resource and add in my two values. So my first value there was the secret number, and the second value was the guess count. Any questions there on how I did that formatting?
It says for mine that the required type is car.
What do you mean required type is car?
The rstring winning text.
Okay.
Is required type car, but provided int.
Because are you passing it to getString?
Oh, it doesn't do that automatically.
Okay. Yeah, it didn't do that automatically. It just passed it directly to set text. So, yeah, if you want to put in placeholders, you have to call getString explicitly. Otherwise, if you just pass it directly to set text, it kind of tries to call that for you.
Yeah. What's the other format? Is that easier to use than this %1 $d thing?
There is no other format.
Oh, I thought you said if there's another language, you can't use that, or.
I said if there's another language, then you need to make sure you include the $1 and the $2.
Oh, okay. Okay.
The positional modifiers. If you just say %D in both of those cases, then you're just saying, well, take whatever, take it in the order that it appears in the string. So that way I could say like $2 first and then $1 next. I could switch.
Okay. We did it the better way, then I get it.
Yeah, we did the better way. Yeah, that's why for both of those strings I'm putting in that modifier, is so that you can rotate where those are. Okay, so we've got that outcome. Okay, what's their next check? What's their next case? So if the number is equal to, that's one case. What's next?
If it's greater than.
Okay.
Or less than, whichever one you want to do.
Okay, so either one. So I would say else if the guess, and do make sure you put that in as else if, not as if. So the guess is, let's say the guess is secret number. You're right, it doesn't really matter which order it goes into. So then I would want to say, well, let's tell the user that it's too big. So outcome secret number. So tell the user something there, and then the reverse would be if it's lower, then I would say too low. So extract string resource here, and this would be guess high text, and this would be guess low text. And I hope you can see I already have a lot of things in my translations for just even a simple application like this. Okay, so let's give that a quick try. So it says my secret number is 6. So if I enter 6, it says yes. It says I got it in 0 tries. If I say 7, it says it's too high. That's fine. If I say 5 or 3, let's say 3, oh, it's too low. Go back to 6. It still says I got it in 0 tries. Okay, so what do I need to do now to get the number of tries correct?
Guess count plus.
Okay, guess count plus. And what line of code should I put that on?
Whenever they guess high or low.
Okay, so if they guess high or low, then I need to increment the count. So guess count and guess count.
Couldn't you just put the guess count in the else if it's an integer? So you're not repeating, because technically, if you get it right on the first try, it's still 1 try. Or would you just want to do the guess count?
That's a good question. So you're saying I could put it up here?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's try that real quick. Because that is a reasonable suggestion. Okay. So if I say, so my secret number is 2, so I'm going to say 5. And guess, I'm going to say 2 and guess. And so I got it in 2 tries. Okay. That makes reasonable sense. Okay. So remember, one of the constraints, though, is we need to say if you guess the same thing multiple times in a row, in multiple consecutive guesses, they don't count, right? So if I say, so my secret number is 7. If I say 5, guess, and then guess 5 again, and you can kind of see now with the UI that's very easy to click that button. it should have counted that as 2 guesses, not 3. Right? So how can I handle that case?
Wouldn't you just put that right under your guess and say if what would it previous guess equals guess guess?
Okay.
Then if it does not equal, then plus guess count. And
okay.
Then if it does,
so what line of code what line of code should I put that check on?
Right under the variable guess.
Right under
38.
Under 38.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah. So it'd be 39. Yeah.
So you'd say if what?
Does not, like the exclamation point.
Okay. So if guess does not equal previous guess. Okay.
Then plus count.
Okay. That makes sense.
But we're not setting previous guess anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Now, that starts to get kind of weird. That gets kind of weird here because now I've got this if statement that's kind of outside of the rest of this, right? So I would actually argue, I would argue that there is some merit to potentially putting the plus in those 2 cases instead, with a little revising, but this is fine. So we just say if it's not different, then we increment the count.
And then will we put previous guess in both texts? Are wait, will we put previous guess in right under that?
Okay, so 1 second. Jonathan, you were asking if you said guess secret number 1 as well. I couldn't just integrate that with I'm not. There is a way to do it, but I don't think there's a way to do something like that, but not exactly what you're thinking. Yeah. That would be an idea. Yeah. So I could account for it as one way to kind of sort this out in here. I could say make this a specific case. So guess is equal to previous guess and treat that as a completely separate case. Right? And then these 3 cases, I would increment that. I think that's what you're thinking about, Jonathan, if I follow that structure. But I'm going to go back to this for the moment. So there's 2 ways to write it there.
You got to reverse one more time. You don't have the...
Yeah. Not equals. So one way it's an equals and the other way it's a not equals. Okay. So I need to save the previous guess, right? So where do I save the previous guess?
Would you do that right under the if statement?
Which if statement?
That one that we just wrote. You do it on line 4, right under 41. Mm-hmm. So basically you're setting... No.
Well, I actually only need to put it in here. Because I only need to change previous guess if I've guessed something new. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Sorry, I was thinking the other way around.
I could take this and put it here, and that would be equivalent either way, if it's outside of the if or inside of the if. But the reality is I only need to change it if it's actually different. Otherwise, it's just 5 equals 5. So the guess only really needs to change if it's different. So in that case, I might say the secret number is 3 here. So 2, guess that again, and go to 3, and there it goes in 2 tries. So that case is covered. Questions?
Isn't that everything for the guess portion?
What if I guess 20?
Oh, that's not a That's not a number between the 1 and 10.
Right. So if I leave it as is, they're going to get counted. That's going to get counted as a guess for them, which might actually be okay. You know, it might be okay for that to be counted as a guess, depending on how you want to play the game. Oftentimes, when we start kind of building this into taking these kind of things and putting into real world software, we usually do want to do some range checking before we do the actual logic. So what can I do to maybe change this so that it doesn't count it as a guess and gives them a different error message if they guess too high or too low?
You can wrap the entire statement from line 40 to 50 in a range.
Okay, I could. That sounds really messy because I'm already nested a few levels. I'm already nested. I've got an if statement here and then an if statement there. So that would put me a third level deep. Okay. So where's the earliest that I can check the range? After what line of code am I able to check the range?
After the very first if statement.
Okay, so I can check the range right here?
Well, after that one, so you
After
need
that one.
an else if.
Okay, so I could check it on that line. Is that what you're saying? Line 30?
Well, kind of, but like
Okay.
on that first if statement, we can add an else if condition
Here?
to check the range.
Oh, okay. So you say if that's the case. So, well, that's a reasonable thing. So I might say and here. So it's not the same as a previous guess, and the guess is greater than or equal to 1. Actually, I just don't need parentheses there. And the guess is less than or equal to 10. So if it's different and it's within the range, then okay. So now 20, guess the secret number. And I get there. Questions? Does that make sense? One way to solve it. Unfortunately, it doesn't tell me a different error message.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. If we nest it, but you said it was 3 levels. So.
It's pretty deep, right? So what could I do? Because I don't need to nest it. There's another way to solve that, and I without needing to nest it.
Oh, if previous guess, you can literally nest it inside of that if statement. You can say if guess does not equal 1 and guess does not equal 10. This, and then it would basically, you can display an error message that way.
Okay. So you're saying I could nest it inside of there?
Yeah, you can nest it inside of that bracket.
Okay.
It's gonna run the application then because they're not guessing the same number.
Yeah. So I could do that. I could say in here do that. Otherwise do the other way. What I'm gonna do here, well, the problem is then that would break if I guess the same number multiple times. So the first time it would tell me that it's out of range. The second time it would tell me it's too high.
Oh, so then you can nest.
So what I would do here, because I'm going to kind of shortcut this process a little bit. So guess is, if I say here instead, if I say the guess is less than 1, or the guess is greater than 10, I could actually shortcut this and say, well, we only want to do this here. And then I've got kind of two options to deal with it. I could say potentially do this part in an else. The other way I could do is I could just easily say return from here. Because at that point, if it's less than 1 or greater than 1, I can say, well, I probably don't want the rest of the code of that to run, regardless of whatever the rest of the code is. Does that make sense? So I could do that, or wrap the rest in an else. So either one of those is kind of acceptable, using a return or using an else.
Couldn't you declare that as like a not, like put an exclamation point in front of the if guess is blah blah blah, and then put the guess count inside of the previous guess?
If the what?
You put so you put the
Mm-hmm.
like exclamation point in front of the guess up there. Like you wrap I forget what they're called.
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about? And you put the guess does not equal previous guess inside of that.
No, I can't put this logic inside of here. That doesn't work. Because it doesn't succeed, it doesn't check the range then if I guess the same number twice. That range check has to be done before
that's
we
what
do
I was
that.
saying. But I was saying if you put the ternary, not the ternary cost, like the exclamation point.
Mo?
Yeah.
Ignore it. Forget it.
Okay. I was just saying, all right.
You're overthinking it. Okay. So let's say we've got that, right? I probably want to give them a message to say, hey, it's out of range. So here I might say the number must be between 1 and 10. So I might say guess out of range.
Would a case and switch, that would be inefficient here? I don't know if you mentioned that. I had to step away for a minute.
No, there's no way to efficiently do switch statements.
Okay, all right.
Because with a switch statement, the cases have to be known at compile time, and we don't know the secret number at compile time.
Okay.
The secret number we only know at runtime, so I can't define cases ahead of time. Because all the cases have to be constants. So,
Mr. Smith, where did the guess out of range come from?
I just added it in.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So I just added that string so that it would say 20. I put it in there and extracted. So the string I put there is number must be between 1 and 10. So does that make sense? Kind of covering all our bases. We can quickly put the reset button in there, and realistically, if we think about the reset button, it's those three lines, right? Same thing we have in onCreate. Does that make sense? So I can take these 3 lines of code, put that down here, copy that code, right? So I could run that code down here. In reality, I don't need, actually it's not those 3 lines of code, it's just these 2. And so instead down here I could say on reset null. Does that make sense? Everybody see that?
Yeah, but then you have to remove the set string get secret number so they don't know the secret number and you set it to blank.
I'm going to leave that in there.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to leave that in there. So that way I can test it easier. It's a lot easier to test it if you know that. So that fixes the reset button. Now, other thing I might want to have the reset button do, you'll notice the reset button doesn't actually change your text. So I probably want to have in the reset, I probably also want to clear out that field, which I can do pretty simply just by saying guess edit dot set text and setting that one to blank.
Mr. Smith, aren't you also going to reset it whenever, like put a on reset whenever they guess the number?
No. I'll let that be. Keep going. So if they do 5, then I'm going to say guess. And then let's see, 10. I can go back to 5. I think that's okay. I think that, the fact that the user has to start a new game by pressing reset, I think that's acceptable. Okay. Because I think it would be more odd for it to automatically start a new game in this case. Okay. Now, what happens if I turn this sideways, right? I'm going to lose all that state, right? So remember that we always need to implement what 2 methods? What are the 2 methods that we need to implement for saving and restoring state?
On instance saved.
Okay. So on instance, it's on save instance state. And then I want to make sure I implement the version that takes a single bundle. And I want to implement on restore instance state. Okay, so I'm going to put both of those at the bottom here. Okay, so what values do I need to save? Well, obviously, anything that here I've got in the background, those numbers I need to save. So the previous guess, the guess count, and the secret number, all 3 of those numbers are numbers I have to save. Right? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Because they're inherently, by me making them internal state like that, they're not in any of the fields where I can extract the values. So I need to store those. And then I also may need to make sure I store the text from both of those fields. So the value that they've currently entered, and the outcome and the text that's in the outcome as well. Because the text that's in the outcome is actually not contained in those 3 values. Those 3 values don't tell me enough to actually necessarily put out the output. So I do need to save that. So in the bundle, so here I'm going to say, and let's make this easier to work with. I'm just going to call that bundle, because that name is long. So bundle dot put int, and I want to put the previous guess. I want to put in the guess count. And I want to save the secret number. Okay, so I saved those 3 values, and then I also want to save, as I said, the text from the 2 fields. So bundle dot put string, and so I would say guess is guess edit dot get text dot toString and bundle dot put string, and then this is outcome get this would be my outcome text dot get text dot toString. So I'm saving those values, right? And so that should account for all of the state that I need. And then, and actually I have all these in the wrong method. This should be in saving the state, not in restoring the state. So that should all be in on save instance. And so I want to save the state, and then on restore, I want to bring all that back. So I might say previous guess is equal to bundle dot get int, and so I'm going to say get int. Let's get previous guess, and if there's not a value there, then use default 0 as the default. With the guess count, we're going to say bundle dot get int, and the guess count, and the guess count is defaulted to 0. The secret number is equal to bundle dot get int, and that is secret number. Yep.
I'm not quite sure if I messed something up because my bundle's showing up as red and my on reset is still like showing errors too.
Okay, well, for these, first of all, I did change the name of that variable to bundle, lowercase bundle. But I don't know what's happening. Where is it showing red and on reset?
It just says it's like on reset's not being used right now. And it happened after we put in the outcome text and everything in there.
You said...
But that's seeming to mess up a few things for me.
Again, you said which part is red?
Right next to on reset.
Okay. Here? Right next to it?
Yeah. It's like it's not being used.
Okay. So you probably don't have an on-click listener here. You probably didn't sell it to on-click call on reset in the XML.
No, I have it there, like on click on reset, but I tried to refactor it and I refactored it, and it just keeps bringing up an empty field.
Okay, can you go back to the XML and verify that it says the right name there? Because if you refactored, it might have automatically changed the name in the XML.
Well, it still says on reset. I'll try and figure it out and see what I can do.
Yeah. Well, so that should be what it looks like, and make sure it takes a view. Okay. So I need to restore those states. I still need to restore the text for both of those fields. So guess edit dot set text, and so that's going to be bundle dot get string.
Hey, Mr. Smith,
Yep.
Why do we change it from outstate to bundle? Is outstate just vague and you just don't like it, or is it?
I was just trying to make the code shorter because the names, it was save instance state and outstate, and I just like those are really long names when it doesn't really tell me much. That's the only reason I shortened those.
Okay, all right. Well, it's not that much shorter. You got to, what is that, like 8 letters versus, but
Well, on the saved instance state is much shorter.
Okay. Other thing too is
Yep.
that in general, on save instant state, on restore instant state, they're kind of like paired up, almost.
Yep.
Not mirror images, but they go together.
Yep. They always go together. I would always expect them to go together.
Okay.
Yep. So on save instant state gets called, and then later on restore instant state will get called, and you basically just do the reverse. So here I'm putting a bunch of stuff into the bundle. Here I'm taking it all out with get. So put, and then get. So that should cover me in terms of having it turn sideways. So that still works. 20 guess. And so that text down there stays the same. And so that's one kind of gotcha that a lot of people get into is they forget, two things that people forget. First of all, sometimes people will take this and try to turn it into an integer before they put it into the bundle. And so if you try to convert the guess, if you try to convert it to an integer when you put it into the bundle, it's going to fail. Because if it's blank, well, that can't be turned into an integer. Does that make sense? So anytime I have user input there, any fields, I always want to save the values in the fields as strings, regardless of whether or not they should be numbers or something else. You always save the edit text, that text, save it as a string. Okay? Any questions right now with this application?
And you said that you don't have to worry about the random number because you set it previously?
Which the
rand.
Rand. Yeah, I don't need to set that one because I'm setting it here in onCreate. And onCreate always runs before onRestore.
Gotcha.
The other thing is that random is an object, and it's actually not serializable. So there's actually no way to save that object. So my only resort is to create a new one every time.
Yeah, about that. So there's on create, on pause, on start, destroy.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one of the applications, we put all that stuff in there, and it was just a debug message. But you don't need to do that. That was just to demonstrate that it's working.
That was just to demonstrate it works and what sequence of events those things happen in. So
later on, using them.
Yeah, later on. Because most of the time, especially for simple apps, you can get away with just using onCreate. Now, I would argue that possibly for the transaction tracker that I asked you to build, you might need to use onStart. You might need to use onStart to update some things. Because that does get called when you come back to a screen. So let's say I leave a screen and go to another screen and then come back, then onStart does get called. So you may find a use for it there. But besides onCreate and onStart, those are a topic for a later day, basically. Cool.
Okay, I wouldn't necessarily know when to use onStart. Like, this is the problem. I need to put this in onStart. I just don't have that intuition yet.
Well, the thing to remember is if you go to a screen and come back, when you come back, that previous screen, the onCreate won't get called.
Oh, okay.
Because you're just going back to an activity that's already running.
So for this guessing game, if you switched apps, and then, like, let's say you put, like, I don't know, whatever, number 8 in there or something, and then you switched apps, you're saying that the 8 would disappear after a while?
No, it wouldn't disappear because onSave instant state is being called. Because we've already, if I were to go over to any of these other apps and come back, on save instance state got called. We come back here, on restore instance state just got called.
So on start is like sort of like functioning like.
Yeah, on start is being called there as well. You said, sorry, sort of functioning like what?
Well, I'm trying to distinguish between saving the instance state and restoring it versus what on start. Like, why would we just use on start here, for example?
Because on start gets called the first time, and it gets called as well as the later times. So when the application starts initially, if I just start clean, here on create and on start are called. But here on restore doesn't get called because there's nothing to restore.
Okay.
So
all right.
The point is, on restore gets called when you need to restore a previous state. On start gets called in basically all the time. So they're not exactly one-to-one. And that's one of those things that trips people up, is that they think that, I can just move all my code from on restore and on save to the other lifecycle methods, and you generally can't.
Okay. I'm probably getting ahead a little bit. We'll kind of come to that naturally in the next few weeks. For now, just worry about on save and on restore and
Basically, you'll use on start when you can't get it working another way.
Is there any chance we can scroll back down to the bundles real quick?
Yep.
Yeah, I got that other issue working.
Okay, cool. I'm not sure. I don't, it should be working. But okay. So that's kind of we've built the app. We've got it mostly there. We're a little bit short on time, so we'll definitely have to finish up at least part of this tomorrow. So one of the things that we want to do, remember, what we're trying to get to is to be able to test the right unit tests against this application. Does that make sense? Because at this point, we've got all the code in here, and I'd like to, I probably should have done it earlier, but I'd like to kind of, because this is where you're going to end up most likely if you're kind of trying to do unit testing right now, is you have to kind of think about, okay, this is the way I would write it, but, kind of coming back in. So if I think about this program, where is most of our logic in this? If I was going to test one method in here, what one method would you choose?
On guess.
Right. And why would you choose that method? Somebody else. Why would that be a good method to test?
It holds most of the game logic.
Yeah, it's got most of the logic, right? If I think about what's in onCreate, there's nothing really I can test here because it's just setup stuff. There's very little I can test there. If I look at onReset, there's very little I can test here. There's on save instance, say on restore, I can't unit test these at all because these all rely on kind of saving and restoring state. So the only way to test those would be with an instrumented test of some sort. So looking at that, basically this is the logic I want to test. But I can't test that logic as is because it's part of my activity class. Does that make sense? So my unit tests, I can only test I only test things that don't use Android. They've got to be pure Java, right? So I need to extract the code that's currently embedded into here into something else, okay, before I can be able to test it. And so one of the things that points to, if you want to build this in a way that can be tested, sometimes, you have to approach it from the beginning, thinking about it differently, where you're taking the core logic of the application and putting it in another class rather than putting it immediately and mixing it in with your activity. Okay. Now, before we go and actually do that, let's go ahead and commit the code that we have. And I'm going to call this guessing game version 1. I'm going to make sure I pick all unversion files in here because I need to get all the other stuff. And so I'm going to hit commit on that, or commit and push. So I would recommend you commit it at that point just to make sure that you have a place to go back to. Does that make sense? Because we have kind of a working application. Okay. So I want to extract this code into another class. What might be a good name to call that class? What could I call that class?
To check on guess.
Well, it may have some more stuff in there in the end, but mainly I do need to move all this logic is one of the things I need to do.
Maybe like guess handler?
Okay. So guess handler, logic test, those are okay names.
Be unit test on guess. I think you'd want to have the name of whatever you're testing, the method in the name. That way it's unambiguous.
So I think what you want to do is step back a little bit. So the application we're making is called what?
Guessing game.
Guessing game. So the way I would think about it is I'm going to actually think about it more like modeling the actual game, which actually is going to mean including a little bit more maybe than just taking on guess and extracting it, which we're actually going to have some challenges because if you look at here, how many times do we refer to outcome text?
A lot.
A lot. So if I'm going to extract this and be pure Java, I can't refer to any of these UI controls. I can't refer to outcome text, and I can't refer to guess edit. Okay? I can't refer to either of those pieces. And I also can't use get string, which is a gotcha, right? Because that's part of Android. So you with me there? Kind of understand part of the problem?
I think so.
So what I'm going to call what I'm actually going to call the class is just guessing game. So we're going to create a class, call it guessing game. And so what I'm going to do, and rather than, and I need to rename it because I misspelled it. Refactor, rename, guessing game. So generally speaking, the thing you don't want to do is just copy and paste code out, and because that will not lead you to where you want to be. And so part of the thing I would stress here, if you really want it to be unit tests, you testable, and you want to get there, you really have to, the best way to think about it is actually from the get-go, is to think about how you can architect that code in a way that it can be unit tests. Because if, again, as I kind of said, if I copy and paste this code out from here to there, it actually just won't work. So I do need to kind of think about it piece by piece. Okay, so if I think about the state of the game, right? What variables do, if I say this object represents the current state of the game, what variables do I need to have? What fields does this object need to have?
Our previous guess count, and secret number.
Okay. Does it also need to have the random number generator?
Yes.
Okay. So I know that those fields I am going to need. So I know I'm going to need the random number generator, previous guess, guess count, secret number. I know I'm going to need those values. Actually, I'm going to just leave those as 0. So I know I need those values. Okay. Well, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to then declare a constructor on this class, and I'm going to use that constructor to initialize the state. So, for instance, I know that I need to create a new random number generator. So I'm going to say rand is equal to new random. And I also know that I need to generate a secret number. And so that will be basically that line of code, is secret number is equal to that. Right. So that's all I need to track the current state of the game. And here's what I need to do when initially it gets started. Does that make sense? Any questions?
Nope.
Okay.
Not from me.
Okay. So then my next thing in there, okay. So I've got the data I need to store the state of the game. I've got a way to initialize a new game, which is what's happening there. And then finally I need a way to do kind of actions in the game, right? So things I might want to do then is I can basically turn these buttons, I can kind of think of those as actions or behaviors. So I might say, let's start with public void guess. And so that takes a guess. And I might say public void reset. Right? Does that make sense as a kind of interface for what we have so far?
Yep.
So we take in a value from the user and run the logic. Or we reset the game, and that's good. So now resetting the game is pretty easy. I'm just gonna say, well, all I need to do I need to do more than that. I think I goofed back in here because I don't think I reset everything. Yeah, I didn't actually reset everything because I'm just noticing, well, actually I need to reset the previous guess to 0 as well as the count because I forgot to do those. So all of those numbers need to go and get reset. So if I start a new game, I need to say previous guess is 0, guess count is 0, and secret number is a new secret number. And just kind of as we saw, that same logic happens when we start the game, so I could just reuse that method in the constructor. So does that make sense for the reset? Kind of understanding that. So now let's think about the guess. Okay, so this is my signature, at least as I have it right now. I'm gonna say, this may or may not be enough. It only I've said right now it returns void, simply because we haven't really decided what type it needs to return. Does that make sense? So we don't really know yet as to what's going to be the sensible thing for it to return. Okay. So looking back at our logic, all right, so let's think about our sequence of events here, right? So the first thing we do is from the edit text, we ask for the string that's present, okay? Is that line of code, line 34, is there any way to move that over to guessing game?
No.
Probably not, simply from the reason that it's just working with the UI. Okay. So that line of code definitely has to stay here. Kind of working down. The next thing we do is we check if it's empty. Well, if I'm wanting guessing game to only take an integer, right, I have to walk down until I get to that point. Does that make sense? So basically that check, this if else, is still going to have to stay here. Okay. Unless I changed guessing game to allow strings, which really we want the user to enter a number, so I want to keep that logic out of here, out of the game logic. That's more input, that's more UI toward a logic. I'm going to leave that there. Okay, so basically the point at which I can extract is that. Does that make sense? Starting at line 39. Any questions?
Nope.
Okay. So if we think about our first check, okay, so we're going to say first check is to check if it's in range or out of range. Okay, well, in here, I can check that pretty easily, and I can say if the guess is less than 1 or the guess is greater than 10, then I need to do something. Okay, so the code as it stands will we'll just set an error message into the output, right? But I can't write to the output here. I can't have any reference to the controls. Okay, so what can I do instead?
Debug message.
Okay, well, debug message is not going to end up on the UI.
You could make it return a string.
I could return a string. Okay, what happens if later in this code I decide it needs to return something else? Then I'm going to have a problem, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is that an error case? That's an error, isn't it? So what would be a better way to handle that? Well, throw an exception. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So here I would go ahead and just say throw new, and specifically I would say illegal argument exception. And there I might say, well, the guess now it's worth noting, as I kind of mentioned previously, I can't use any of the Android APIs here, which means I can't translate or extract that string. Got it? That string cannot be extracted to a string resource. Okay, so we're going to say, if it's out of range, then fine. The next thing I can do is kind of what we had here. That makes sense. If the guess is not equal to the previous guess, then I need to increment the guess count and change that. That all applies. There's no Android logic happening there. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So then the next piece of logic is the question of which of these, how do I deal with these three cases? And so I could do that. One of the ways I could try to do that is I could say, well, let's return a string here, a string here, and a string here. Well, then I'm going to have to define three strings, but they can't be these three strings because I can't translate. With me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to actually do something different. Okay. In this world, because I don't want to have those kind of dependencies on the Android. What I'm actually going to do instead is I'm going to create what we call enumeration. Public enum. And I might call this guess result. And actually, let's make this a separate, I'm going to make that a separate file. So I'm going to make a file here, new Java class. I'm going to tell it that it's actually an enum. And we're going to call this guess result. Okay. Because I know that the results can be one of three things. So it can either be that it is the secret number, it is low, or it is high. So maybe win, low, high. Does that make sense?
Oh no, I just accidentally created a class called guess result. How do I recover?
You just change it to the word to
enum.
enum.
Okay, all right.
You just replace the word class with the word enum.
Just double checking. Is this going to be recorded for us?
I do have it recorded. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I need to get it uploaded. But so that's my whole enum class. And so the reason I'm doing that again is to kind of break the logic that's in, break the logic out of being tied to any of the display, the way the data or the response is being displayed. So in the end, I only want it to return one of those three things. So I've created this guess result enum. And what I'm going to then do is I'm going to say it returns a guess result. So if the guess is equal to a secret number, then return guess result. Guess result win. If it's higher, then return guess result high. If it's lower, then return guess result low. Else if the guess is greater than the secret number. Everybody tracking with me on that front?
On line 16, did you change the void to guess result?
Yep.
I just missed that. Okay.
Yep. I changed this function to return a guess result. I had just started it as void because it's like, well, we don't know yet, right? We don't know what the result is going to be. So let's define that later. So now we know. So it's going to be a enum value that returns. Right? So what's not in here, right, is none of the logic to read the string from the input box and none of the logic to put the value back into the output. Does that make sense? So this is a class now that is separated completely from the Android APIs, okay? Which means that I can unit test it. Now I do have a gotcha in that I'm going to need to be able to get these I'm going to need to be able to get some of these values out. So the guess count and the secret number, I do need to extract those so I can display them. So I do need to add some getters down here for both of those two values. So public int get guess count, and that's going to return the guess count. And I also need one to return the secret number to me. So public int get secret number. Oh, I do also, actually, I do need to get the previous guess because I'm going to need that for serialization for saving the state. So get previous guess and return prev guess. Okay. So I've got getters for all three of those values. I don't have setters because I don't really need them to be able to change the state of the game. I just want them to be able to get the state of the game. Okay. So I'm going to leave it here, and we'll finish this up tomorrow. I'll let you kind of puzzle over how to change main activity to use this guessing game object instead.
Right, the code.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can put that on GitHub or drop that in Discord.
Yeah, I can put that. I'll put that up on GitHub. I'll probably just a zip file here though for people.
Yeah, that's awesome. I got caught up when we were doing the on guess thing, and I just never. Yeah, I'm way back there.
Yeah. So we haven't changed main activity. Basically, we just made this guessing game object, and we'll do the rest on tomorrow.
I'll have to check these labs 3.1. What does that do again? Let's see.
Oh, not Node. I want to go to Android. Kill my recording here.